everybody, Wildman Wes here, and this is the Worst State of Movies, where I take a look at 50 movies made in each of the United States that are considered the worst of the worst, and after watching them I decide whether or not they are deemed worthy of said title. Let's see where we go to today. Today we venture to South Carolina. Man, I miss Myrtle Beach, but that's beside the point. Today, our topic is about mercenaries and vigilantes. Comic books definitely have an array of said characters. Spider-Man, Deadpool, Deathstroke, Lobo, the Crow, the Punisher, the list goes on and on. However, there is one vigilante slash mercenary that doesn't necessarily get a lot of love. Maybe for good reasons, but who knows? DC Comics had a character that was made in the 1970s that is different than a lot of them because most of those characters are put in modern day settings, give or take. This one takes place during the time of the Civil War, and after about 35 years after the character was created, a movie was made. And that is what we're talking about today with 2010's Jonah Hex. The movie, for lack of a better phrase, is a origin story of the character of Jonah Hex, who was a soldier, part of the Confederacy during the Civil War, and at one point he does not like what his group is doing, and he wants to secede from the group, and one of his comrades and soldiers that is like a brother to him, he doesn't like that very much, and Jonah has to take matters into his own hands by taking said soldier's life. The soldier's father, named Turnbull, is not happy about this whatsoever, and what better way to exact revenge than take the life of Jonah's wife and child, and then disfiguring him to leave the elements to consume him. Unfortunately for Turnbull, Jonah doesn't go down without a fight that bad. And he also, while wandering Carolina, he's able to talk to the dead and get information. And eventually he ends up in a small little town where he has a nice little trusty side piece named Lula who is concerned about him, but at the same time, the acting is about as dry as a day-old toast. But I need to backtrack just a little bit before I get too ahead of myself. Jonah is learning how to become the greatest bounty hunter of all time to catch up with Turnbull and exact the revenge upon the revenge, or whatever it's going to be. And unfortunately for Jonah, Turnbull catches a sudden case of death in a bad fire. So he's left pretty much beside himself, not knowing what to do with his life at this point. Meanwhile, President Ulysses S. Grant finds out some information that Turnbull is actually alive, and obtaining information about a device that was originally thought up by Eli Whitney, the person that created the cotton press. This nation killer is supposed to be the end-all be-all weapon that can take out any enemy and claim supreme dominance. Well, we all know Turnbull. If you've seen the movie, he's hell-bent on just this world domination, and when the Union goes to find Jonah Hex, he's not really wanting to help them out, but then when he finds out that Turnbull's alive, well, honor and duty and revenge, and you put them all in a blender, you get a nut job ready to shed some blood. Now we have quite a cat and mouse chase where Jonah's trying to find Turnbull. Turnbull knows that Jonah's trying to find him, and what better way to lure Jonah into a trap by taking his side piece hostage. Jonah eventually goes to find Lula, he saves her, and has an all-down drag-out fight on a boat where Turnbull is going to fire off the nation killer on Independence Harbor on the 4th of July. Wow, talk about some serious irony in that statement. Of course, this being a comic book movie and also a Warner Brothers movie, there's gotta be a happy ending. Jonah does defeat Turnbull, rescues Lula. However, he turns down the offer to be a part of Ulysses S. Grant's marshals to save the day whenever trouble comes along. He just takes a quick reward and goes off into the sunset like any other kind of Western character. I wish I could say there's a lot that I left out in this review. However, this movie is legitimately an hour and a half long. So when it comes to comic book movies, a lot of us are used to sometimes 2 to 2.5 to 3 hours, and sometimes longer depending on which group you're talking about. Yeah, so we're going to talk about what I like and what I don't like about this film. Start off with what I don't like. Yeah, I'm gonna go into that a little bit about that hour and a half time frame. Now, I get it. There are times where our attention span is not the greatest in the world when watching movies. However, with comic book movies, especially the first one where they talk about the backstory, you kind of need to get a little time to be invested. And sometimes 2 hours to 2.5 hours for a comic book movie, especially regarding the origin, is necessary. In this one, it really felt like it was 10 pounds in a 5-pound bag. It was very hard to keep up at times, and we're going to move into this next part that I like to call montage overload. Over half this movie was montages of just Jonah getting from place to place and just kind of talking about his backstory. And when they talked about his backstory, you really didn't get a whole lot much other than the first 5 minutes of the film where you see a lot of the things that went down that caused Jonah to become the character that he is today. When it comes to the acting in this movie, our cast is pretty loaded. Very loaded with a lot of well-known names. We have Josh Brolin, we have Megan Fox, we'll get to that. We also have John Malkovich, we have Will Arnett, we have Michael Shannon, we have Wes Bentley. We also have, if my mind serves me right, let's see, Michael Fassbender from 300 and the younger version of Magneto, which I love his performance in this movie. However, when it comes to some of the other performances, it's a little hit or miss. Moving on to Megan Fox. I feel that she kind of has this performance in the movie where it's very dry. It almost feels like she's reading off cue cards. I think she took a page out of Christopher Walken's book from Saturday Night Live. But I digress. John Malkovich, well-known, talented actor. He's been around for decades. In this one, it feels like his performance, it comes off almost Shakespearean. Now, don't get me wrong. Sometimes having a Shakespearean-type performance in a movie is noteworthy. In this case, it felt out of place. It really did. And it's not sitting here shaking the finger. It just, you didn't know whether to laugh that he was just being ridiculously over the top, or if you were nervously chuckling to see how the evil behind the words were effective. I'm still trying to figure that one out. If you've got an idea on that one, put it in that comment section below. I really want to hear what you have to say about it. Here's where my brain started going into some really, really weird moments. When it comes to the concept of Jonah Hex and his character, I watched the movie and I'd never really known about the character in the comics. And when I saw certain parallels to other characters, I started kind of scratching my head a little bit. Even with this kind of talking to the dead and this kind of supernatural force going on, it felt, and the revenge story felt very much like The Crow. However, I did do my research, folks. I did see that, as I mentioned before, Jonah Hex's character was created in the 1970s. The Crow didn't come out until much later. So I sit before you going, you know what? The Crow is a great character, but Jonah Hex did not rip them off. So, okay, before anybody gets mad, I'm just leaving it at that. Okay, no. Moving on. However, there was one thing that did kind of feel like it was being ripped off, and it was dealing with the weapon of the Nation Killer. One of the things that was needed were these orbs that were used to shoot out of a cannon to have some sort of frequency to detonate certain towns. And they're referred to at one point by Michael Fassbender's character as pretty orange balls. Oh man, I wish I could find a Vegeta or a Frieza joke to insert on this, but we're not. We're talking about Jonah Hex. I'm gonna leave my Toriyama fanboy moment on the floor. Moving on. The biggest takeaway for what I liked, the special effects were fairly decent on this one. Even just the concept of Jonah Hex's arsenal. The double Gatling gun was pretty awesome to see at the beginning of the movie, but after that it just kind of falls flat with a lot of the arsenal that he uses. One in particular thing that I still scratch my head on was the final battle between Jonah and Turnbull on the boat before they're trying to attack Independence Harbor. It cuts away back and forth from the prairie, or the area that I believe is where Jonah's home was at, that his family was taken from him, and it goes back and forth from Jonah and Turnbull fighting on the boat to the prairie, and it goes back and forth, and that really threw me off. It felt like some weird acid trip or peyote trip, I don't know. All I know is I didn't have any, and I probably would have enjoyed it more, or at least that sequence, if I had some. Alrighty, it is time to grade this movie. Now, after weighing both the goods and the bads, you kind of get an idea possibly what I'm gonna say. And a lot of it is, I do have to say this first. I get what they were trying to do with this one, because Jonah Hex isn't necessarily one of the more popular DC characters that we've all grown to know and love over the past few decades or whatever, for almost a century if you think about it. However, how they approached it when it came to the story and even just the performances of some of the cast members alone, I felt like there was something missing. And the montage overload definitely took away from that. I want to say it's not the worst movie, but they could have done so much more with this, especially because it was an origin story movie. And because of that, I have to unfortunately say to Jonah Hex, folks, I'm sorry, I really do not like dogging comic book movies. We all do it. But at the same time, we want to give it so much love, especially fans of comic books in general, because we sit there and we read the panels and we look at the imagery and we want to immerse ourselves in those stories. And then when you take those stories and you put it into a feature film, you want to still have that feeling like the first time you read an issue of a comic book character you love. And in this situation, I'm kind of glad I didn't read any of the Jonah Hex comic books before watching this movie, because I would have went in with a lot of very varying expectations. I just went into it with the expectation it was called the worst movie made in South Carolina, so I went with that, and watching it, I can understand why. Apart from that, we hope you enjoyed this review on Jonah Hex. If you agree with me, leave a thumbs up. If not, I understand. Sometimes somebody's cup of tea is not somebody's can of Red Bull. Also, make sure you share on social media, but most importantly, you hit that subscribe button. Until then, I'm Wildman West, and we will see you next time on The Worst State of Movies, or some of the other stuff we have here on Dragonfire Entertainment. Take care.